Here we go for an episode of Always Another Game podcast, where today I have an athlete here who I'm very excited to go inside his mind to find out the highs and lows of his time with sport, and most importantly, what he does now, because he has not only a very unique story in the sport that he does. I love having unique sports on here. He has a very unique style in his approach to coaching, which I love as well. So today with me, I have David Lederman. David, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. After our pre-podcast chat, I was like, yeah, the energy is going to be good today, so no pressure.
You got to live up to that now. You're setting the expectations high. So.
Really high. Now, I don't normally do this, David. I normally kind of take a snippet of what people would like to be introduced, and I'll kind of throw it in there and I'll leave it over to you. But I couldn't not do your full snippet today, because as I replied to you in my email, this was one of my favorites so far. It had a very nice ending and I really enjoyed it. So anybody on video, do excuse me, because I want to do it justice. So I'm going to read it. But I've got David is a leadership coach, TEDx speaker, and author who is passionate about helping high achievers navigate major life transitions with clarity, ease, and fulfillment. Here we go. David was also one of the youngest internationally certified inline skating instructors in the country back when rollerblading was cool. That was my favorite bit. I could have done the last bit, but it wouldn't have done it justice.
That's me to a T. It's like there's things I find cool, and I get looks from everybody, from my wife to my daughter to the. I was literally we moved apartments recently, and it was funny. We hadn't met the neighbors yet, and of all the times, I'm literally doing something to make as my daughter. You know, she's like me, she's stubborn and all that. And I caught her in this moment where she just had to come clean. And I'm sitting there, I'm doing my winning dance, like a total just crazy guy. And I don't have rhythm, that's for sure. And then right as that happens, this buff neighbor guy comes out and just looking at me like, who the heck is this? And I was like, there you go. That's me. I was like, that was a cool dance back in the day, just like rollerblading. So.
Yeah, I love rollerblading. I did it recently a few months back, for the first time in years, but it was the first time ever I'd used quads. I used to play inline hockey. My background's ice hockey, so roller hockey was an easy transfer. Honestly, quads is ridiculously hard. I looked like a complete amateur. People you played hockey. I'm like, No, quads are different, guys. Please don't judge me on this game. Honestly, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't.
It's similar enough that the brain and the body, this should happen. It should just work. And it doesn't, and that's actually part of what I loved about rollerblading. And I love skiing too. And I wanted to, I really got into it because of that. Because I was like, I just want to go really further with my skiing skills. And I didn't expect to be this hardcore blader. I just was like, this is something I can do in the warmer seasons. I grew up outside of Philadelphia. And man, there was something about just kind of crossing over into this place where it's similar, but it's different enough that, I don't know, I feel like just in life in general, it's like it allows you to have a slightly different perspective or a slightly different way of using your body for an underlying kind of goal that might be very, very similar. Does that make sense? And that makes it stronger and so forth. So it helped my skiing, it helped my blading. So
yeah, we're definitely gonna go into that, because I find that very interesting concept that I've used in sport. But yeah, my wife gets sick and tired of me. When I see a fresh tarmac road, I'm like, oh man, that's perfect rollerblading road. And she's like, you haven't rollerbladed since you were a kid. I was like, yeah, but just imagine doing it on that fresh tarmac. Oh, you'd be flying.
I thought I was the only one who geeked out when I saw a fresh tarmac like that. I would.
No, I think anybody would.
Yeah,
I think anybody would. Okay, so who is David Lederman?
Well, most people think it's a talk show host that was famous when I was in high school. So that's the first thing. I'm not the talk show host. I don't know, man. I always struggle answering this question because it's like there's so many facets to who and what we are. You know what I mean? I could give you the career stuff, which you just kind of gave. I could, at the end of the day, I'm just a guy who's trying to figure things out, be a good dad. I absolutely adore my daughter, be a good husband, and, enjoy the time I got here. And that can sound all poetic and trying to be like a wise sage or whatever. It's not. It's just the more I move through my life, different careers, different degrees of success. It's just like there's a simplicity that we miss a lot of times. And actually, it's that simplicity that actually makes us better performers, better professionals, better athletes. And man, I'm just trying to figure it out and enjoy the process versus in the past, I was like, I got to figure this out. And there was this pressure to do so. So, took me 4+ decades to kind of get to this point, but that's kind of it, man. Just trying to enjoy this process.
I think many people would be nodding away there and agreeing with you, yet the implementation is completely different, right? We do forget to live in the moment. We're very, in today's world, we're very dopamine driven. We're very molecule of more. And we do forget that just the hugs with your partner, with your kid, watching a movie, going to the park. They always said the best things in life are free, and they still are. When you're in the moment, they are. And I think it's just that conversation that as coaches we have to keep pushing and keep guiding and keep getting other people to see that it works because we show it.
Yeah, I love that. And I hadn't heard the molecule more for, but in a way, it's interesting. I'm fascinated by paradoxes, points where like there's almost two truths that seem like they don't fit quite together. And especially that's one of the things why I love sport is like, and maybe it's why certain like I gravitated to rollerblading because it's something you can do individually. It's something you can do with a whole group of people. I used to do city skates in Philadelphia, which was awesome. You'd have 60 to 100 people literally, driving down major roads, holding on to taxi cars and stuff, and people honking. Nice. It was nowadays you probably couldn't do that, but it was really, really awesome. And it's like there's this sweet spot of being your absolute best, which requires more, but in a way where you can still savor and enjoy what's happening and what's unfolding in that process. And I'm sure we'll get into that more because that's what I'm all about. But it's something that I've always just gravitated towards. And I wish I could say I was that way to begin with, but life has thrown me plenty of curveballs to kind of say, you're going to learn this lesson. And because you're stubborn and kind of dense, I joke with my daughter, it takes me like 10,000 times to hear something and before I finally get it. But if I didn't go through the hell we went through trying to start a family, if I didn't have some of the experiences that I had, rollerblading and hurting myself and things of that sort, it's like I wouldn't be here right now and having that perspective. So yeah, it's an interesting path.
And you just said it there. It's one of the biggest reasons why you're here. And obviously when I asked who you were, you mentioned father, your daughter. You're very open about the situation here and where it's led you to. Can you share with everybody a little bit what that's all about?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to be a dad. And in 2012, we lost 2 pregnancies in ways I wouldn't wish on anybody, not even like my worst enemy. It shattered my heart and my desire and notion to want to be, not to be stereotypical, but the provider, the protector, the person who's here to, have an amazing family, but, take responsibility for that. And it was things so beyond my control, and seeing my wife physically go through agony, not to mention emotionally and so forth, and not being able to do anything at all. It really, man, it ripped off my perspective on a lot of things. And then we almost lost my daughter at the very end. We had to have an emergency C-section that was literally like that after a 36-hour delivery where everything that could go wrong went wrong. And it was just one of those things where in those final moments, I was like, at that point, I always believed in sort of something outside of ourselves, whatever you want to call that. But by that point, it was already shattered. And yet in that moment where they rushed my wife in the emergency room, like, okay, you're going to come in now. And I have just seconds here. I took a moment, just took a breath. And I'm just like, okay, if there's something out there, I was like, just please let her be okay. And then that molecule of more, right? I'll never forget. I said, okay, if she's okay and there's a little bit of extra wiggle room to ask for something, can you just make her so she's really fun? I'd really love to have a daughter that's just fun. And life has a funny way of doing things. And man, she literally, when they took her out, they said her arm was up like this, almost like a superhero. And they thought they're going to have to take her to the neonatal intensive care unit because of how trying and difficult the delivery was, because she got stuck and my wife got an infection and all these things. And they were shocked. They were like, whoa, this one's a fighter. She didn't need anything. She was fine. And she has this strength, man, that is just like unparalleled. But she has this fun to her as well. And in a way, the moment I saw her, I was like, partly I was just relieved because now I have a daughter, and finally we're good. But man, it was like she just shifted life in a way that only a kid can do. And if you have a kid out there, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you probably heard somebody who has a kid who said that. So every second of every day, she calls me on my crap. And not only that, it's not even calling me on my crap. What she does is she models me. So when I see stuff in her I don't like it, I'm just sitting there going like, oh man, that is me, isn't it? You know what I mean? At this early age. And that's the most humbling mirror there is, that no coach, no performance trainer, whatever, can come close to in my experience in terms of helping me see. So she's just made me truly a better person. And given what we went through, man, she is my inspiration through and through.
Yeah, I feel all of that. You think as a parent, you're just teaching your kids and guiding them. They've taught me so much. Like, the reason you and I are talking today is because of my boys, because of the realizations I was having as a parent. I wasn't showing up how I wanted to show up. And that brought me back to my hockey days and performing, and how would I overcome adversity when I was playing sport. It's the same thing as a parent or a business owner or a husband or whatever. And they teach us so much if we're willing to take that lesson. We're not too old, we're not too mature to learn lessons from them. And my boys are a huge driving force behind everything that I do. I'm very legacy driven. Legacy's a key factor in habit building. And when I've kind of learned that, I realized, wow, yeah, I'm so legacy driven, and that helped me. I don't use the word why. I don't know why. I think because people say it's cliche, I try and avoid it. But they give me a deeper purpose, and then a passion to do so. So, I'm sure we got lots of parents here, maybe with a little tear and going, yeah, they do. But it's just realization to anybody that is listening that they do. Listen to them, learn from them as well. It helps us grow because they teach us so much. And they keep us humble with some of the stuff they say to us because they've got no filters.
Yes, that's for sure. She has
now,
said
one of the
many
things you said there, one of the things you said there, David, previously was about this mix between skiing and rollerblading. And I know it as cross training. You see a lot of young athletes, especially these days, not even just young athletes, like top athletes, with the injury levels so high because they're just stuck in one way of doing something. And something my brother and I used to do in our latter parts of our playing career is we would always have 2-3 months off being on the ice, and we would play a lot of tennis. We both enjoyed tennis. It was very reactive, hand-eye coordination. There was acceleration. There was agility. There was everything we needed to be athletic, but it was different movements to how we skated. And we loved it. And I feel it had a massive factor to both of us being very well injury-free and able to play the game the next season in better, continuous improvement as well. So, what was that realization when you were skiing that you went, hey, you know what, rollerblading as well?
I don't know that there was any clear realization other than I just want to keep thriving and enjoying this. For me, what I loved about skiing and what I loved about rollerblading was this sense of freedom, this sense of speed that you could have, but a controlled speed. It initially just gave me that opportunity to extend that. You know what I mean? It was slightly different mechanics and stuff. But as I started to get into rollerblading, I started to realize wow, this is really, really interesting. And as I did it longer, beyond the season, like you, I started to see wow, I'm skiing a lot better. And actually there are some nuances here that are really, really, really important. I'm a huge nature guy. I love being in nature. I think nature has so much to teach us, not in a weird way, but just a practical way. And, I tell people it's like there are 4 seasons, right? And each season gives us we work and engage that season differently, when you think of that less as somebody nowadays who's just in an office, regardless of the time of year, and think of somebody back in the day an ancestor kind of thing, and what they would do in those different seasons. And in a way, we're still working, we're still growing, we're still doing whatever it is that we're trying to do, building skills and so forth, but we have to do it differently. And to me, that's what cross training is all about. It's another season in a way, literally, in terms of it can extend your season like it was doing. But in terms of you playing tennis and talking about, moving in a different arrangement, using different muscles and getting different kinds of coordinations down and so forth, and even just using your hands and eyes differently. All of that is another flavor that you get because of that season that ultimately allows you, once you come back to spring or whatever, for for flowers to blossom or whatever, to get that growth that you want and that you're hoping for, and that you're not even expecting, in a way, because you can't totally predict what's going to happen. And so to me, I think it's incredibly powerful. Just as you don't go to the gym or you see those people who it's like they live one part of their body. I love seeing those guys who are like massive up here. You know what I mean? They're like the Hulk up here, but they look like Martin Short from like the waist down. You know what I mean? It's like you wouldn't do that. That's not healthy. That's not effective. And when it comes to any sport, the more you can extend your perspective and how you're using your body and your skills, the better.
Yeah, and that was the thing. It's like hand-eye coordination in ice hockey is really important. One of my favorite players on my team just scored a goal the other day by a little juggle, created space, and got his shot off. And if he wasn't any good at hand-eye coordination, he wouldn't have scored. And tennis then provided us with hand-eye that you don't do it all game in ice hockey, but it just gives you those little bit extras. And it avoids overtraining as well. If you're not working the opposing muscle groups that aren't doing as much, overtraining and injury, it just becomes more obvious. And if we're looking at younger athletes here, let them experiment. Yeah. They may love football, but in 2 years' time, they may be a cricket player. And they may be a fantastic cricket player. How would we know? Because they have to go try the game to find out. And I do believe that we should do that. And even as adults, like I said, for you, it feels like it was almost like an increased season. Like, I love skiing, but unfortunately, I can't do that a huge amount when there's no snow. So here we go. Here's my alternative. And you kind of found this passion by testing, by trying something.
Yeah, I think I love how you frame it, even for kids, but I think as grownups, we can really appreciate that, because oftentimes once you get to a certain level in sport, part of what we need as humans is just variety. And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to completely change, but if we can bring new eyes to it, and those new eyes come from doing things, other things that we can then bring back to it. And so I think there's tremendous power in letting your children go and explore. And I always say, follow the inspiration, really. I typically say follow the energy, but in terms of, sports, like follow the inspiration, let that lead you. And so many times I talk to high achievers, high performers. It's like at a certain point, they start to kind of burn out. You know what I mean? There's, and there is something to be said for pushing beyond that mentally and so forth, but there's something to be said for, letting what naturally can happen, which is allowing an extended sort of training regimen. And I'm including tennis in your example as part of your training, even though it didn't feel that way, to enhance that. And it brings almost like new ingredients into the mix. And that then allows you to go deeper and move beyond the burnout in a way that's not just, I'm going to push through this thing and, and so forth. So,
yeah. Coaching at any point, coaching humans, coaching sport, coaching at any point is a challenging job, if you want to call it that. You started at 15, internationally certified. How did you find that, being such a young age in that role?
I followed the inspiration, honestly. I've always been the type that, like, when I was real young, I would literally take apart, I'm dating myself, but like Walkman and boom boxes and whatever little contraption I could, because I was fascinated with how things were put together. I take them apart to see how they're put together. And in a way, it's, one of the things that I'm sure we'll get to a little bit later in the conversation is I'm all about helping people align with something I call their zone of fulfillment. And a key part of that is what I call their medicine. It's so much more than just our innate genius. It's things that just are so naturally us, just as being an oak tree is just being an oak tree. They're not out to be anything else. When it comes to me, breaking things down and communicating that and finding ways to go, here's a point of friction. Let's remove that. And now it can be more effective. It led me to have a really successful career in tech for over 20 years in the field of user experience in particular. And it's just one of those things when I was there in rollerblading, I was like, wait a second, how they're teaching me. Because I used to go to these clinics that I eventually taught at. I was like, man, it would be so much easier if they just said this. And if they just kind of first did this instead of that. Now, if I'm, instead of me teaching, like one of the things that I would always do, I found, for example, it's just a really simple example, is I was like, for myself and others, when it comes to rollerblading, because it's so different, even if you skated on ice, for most of your life, we're spending so much time trying to just maintain our balance and not fall. That one of the things I just had, and I started to do for myself, is I'm like, I want to get good at falling. And I literally would have people just fall right from the get-go. And I would literally praise the person who did it in the most awkward way. And now I'm like, everybody copy that person. And now it's fun. Now everyone's doing it. And now I'm like, great, you guys just removed the fear of falling. You see it's actually necessary and it can help you. And now let's go. Right. And that in and of itself took away so much pressure, so much bodily tension and so forth, that it was like night and day with people, that one little thing. Right. Now, there's things that you can do mechanically in terms of you're trying to learn a crossover move. You're doing tricks and ramps and things of that sort. But to me, it was like, I can't explain it any more than each one of us has something where it's like, I don't have to try. It's just my brain sees it and I communicate it. And so for me, I was like, I want to teach at this clinic. And that I learned that I was so grateful for. And they're like, you're too young. You're too young. Eventually I'm like, why does age matter? I see all different people. And they're like, well, you need to be certified. I was like, cool. How do I do that? And they're like, you're too young. So I researched it. So, okay. And lo and behold, not too long after, the organization was actually having a training program nearby, and it just worked out. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And not only did I do it, but I was in the same group. We had groups of about 8 people, because there were literally like 200 people being certified. But one of the people who taught me was there, and he was in my group. And I'll never forget him just looking at me like, I was like, who do you think you are coming here and thinking like you're going to teach? And it's funny because they posted scores for people, not only on the actual theoretical part, but the live training sessions where you had to lead a group. And I not only got a higher score than him, I got the highest score in the entire group, right? And I didn't sit there and say that because like, oh, I'm so great. I'm just being me. And don't tell me I can't do it, because that just adds more motivation. But it was something that came so naturally, and it was just something I enjoyed. So rather than be going down that I'm going to compete, being a hardcore rollerblader, I love the sport of it. I love the enjoyment of it. And I wanted to help other people get really good at it. And so that's kind of the avenue that I took.
Yeah. If you're good enough, you're old enough. That's how I've always played. I played pro at 16. I had 2 kids on my team when I was about 18, 19 that were 15 and that competed at an adult level. Not at the highest level at that time. That was Division 2 when I would play with those boys, but they competed every night. They were safe. They were injury-free. They were strong boys. And now in my sport, it's completely different. A young player now is considered 20, 21. It's changed a lot. But my theory is, and you do see it in sport occasionally, but if you're good enough, you're old enough. And it shouldn't be that you are a certain age. If you're physically more grown for your age, which a lot of people are, if you're physically, if your technique is there, then, just kind of let them play. How did you deal with that doubt at 15? It sounded like it didn't deter you.
I didn't really have much doubt, because I literally would get home from school. I'd throw off my shoes, put on my blades, and I'd spend hours on them. I felt more comfortable on my blades than I did walking at one point, because it was just, that's all I did. And we had really good pavement in our neighborhood and all around. So that helped too. I think the main thing was, we each not only have that thing that we know is us and that we want to do, but man, it's like, there's just something when somebody says you can't do it, and they have it's one thing if somebody saw my skills or saw me and said, don't do it. It's another thing if it's something so arbitrary and stupid as This is just a rule we just made up, and I'm making an assumption that, I mean, stupid's a judgment, but I'm saying it's stupid because I'm like, you're missing out. You're missing out on what sports about. Sports about people, in my opinion, helping, inspiring one another to get better, to be better human beings at the root of it, right? Physically, mentally, emotionally, as a team, and so forth. And it's like, it's one thing to say, okay, you're too young because the risk of injury is really high or it's really dangerous. Okay, that makes total sense. It's another thing just because, well, for whatever reason, this is the norm and you're outside that norm. And so I found I actually wasn't nervous. It was something where the only doubt I had was whether or not, to what extent I would trust my instinct to do the different trainings the way I truly wanted to do them. And I was really fortunate that at that age, I didn't let my own inner critic kind of get in the way and hold me back. And I think that's why I did so well, because the evaluators were just like, wow, we've never seen people use, tennis balls and cones and things like this in that way before. And the energy and the way you do it is so different. And that's what they rewarded, which was really cool to see at the end, versus just, okay, I'm doing the exact same thing that I've been taught. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's where innovation comes. That's where we look at those players like Steph Curry and go, wait, the game has changed because of somebody like him being him. You know what I mean? And that's the power of our medicine. That's the power of aligning with that in how we play sport.
Yeah. Recently, I had a fantastic guest on here, and her motto in life was just one more. And it was often on the basic level, one step, one breath, the very simplistic level, which was really powerful. And you said you didn't have the issue with the critique and the negative side. You had this drive. But just one more took you, on one occasion especially, a little too far, and it took you further in an ambulance and into a hospital. So not only would I like you to kind of share that element of just one more, but how do we know when one more is too much? Is there too much?
So that's a great question. I think for every athlete and actually for every human being on the planet, that's the question. And that's what I've spent the last, honestly, 7 years ruthlessly trying to explore, after myself slamming into a really low point in my career professionally, when all the trauma after the emotional stuff after the pregnancy loss kind of came together, and a side hustle also failed all at the same time. And so I really it's the ultimate paradox to me, which is like, you need more to grow. And then if you have too much, then you get hurt, right? Or you go too far, or, a variety of different things. And so there's tons of books out there that tell you to do one or the other. They make great self-help books. They make great podcast talks. And they make really great, periods of training and so forth, where we feel like, yes, I'm doing it and so forth. But inevitably, every single one of those people will say, well, just don't do the opposite part. But they don't ever explain how. And what I was fascinated by was, how do you, again, being from outside of Philadelphia, like Rocky Balboa, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to go the 15 rounds, right? There's truth in that. There's wisdom in that. And man, do we need that. And at the same time, if you're an entrepreneur, that you didn't succeed unless you were willing to pivot and change course, to not go one more, to actually realize, no, I need to adjust course here. And so that to me is the ultimate question. But to get to the story real quickly that you had asked about, I was just starting to get into to ramps at that point, as a rollerblader. So I did all kinds of tricks. I was extremely skilled in doing on the ground kind of tricks. And I was like, I want to get into ramps. And so my first day learning ramps, get it. This is fun. This is awesome. Everybody in the group says, okay, we're going to go break for lunch. It's a long day. It's a hot summer, humid, northeastern US kind of summer day. And I'm like, I got to do one more, because the last jump that I just did, the one prior to it wasn't that great. But I'm tired, and I'm like, come on, you can do this. And so I jump, and I could feel my weight was back. I overcompensated and basically landed straight on my head. I had gear on. I had protective stuff, a helmet and so forth. And literally, as soon as I bounced, it was like, whoa. And then I had all these people running up to me. And there's nothing like a feeling where, if you've had an injury before, where everyone's running up to you and then they turn away because it just looks really bad. and you know it's not good, and you're just sitting there like, what? And I think I was like in the adrenaline state from it. It wasn't yet hurting at that point, but it was just like, what is going on? And I can't see. And every single person is like calling, like, get an in. You know, I literally had braces, and I could feel my front teeth were dangling by the braces. I ended up going to the emergency room. I had to get stitched up and so forth. Luckily, somehow I didn't break anything, but it was a really, really gnarly accident. And I remember it set me back so much. Right? It set me back in terms of, I mean, I literally was months away from getting braces off, right? And that's not related to sport and so forth. It literally got me to the point where all of a sudden now I'm feeling fear when I never felt fear on blades before. Do you know what I mean? Mm. And all that was healthy to work through in a way, but it's like this notion of one thing, just one more, there's nuance to it, right? There's always more nuance to it. And so that's the story. It's a much longer conversation to get into the mechanics of how you determine that. But to me, the simplified version, which isn't going to do it justice, because everyone's going to immediately want to go, okay, cool. So how do you do that? I have a TEDx talk coming up next month that's all about helping people align with what I call your zone of fulfillment. And think of that as your sweet spot of navigating these paradoxical truths in the moment in a really practical way. And the truth of the matter is, no one else can tell you that, you know, inside you. But most of us are so disconnected from that because we're being driven by either an insecurity or something that says, I've got to do this or else I'm going to be a failure, weak, whatever. And I call that the wounded warrior kind of spirit that's allowing us to achieve a lot, but oftentimes they don't care. It's like, I'm going to destroy whatever I have to make something happen. And you'll see that a lot with a lot of athletes out there in terms of, you know, the impact of their so-called success. But the short, really overly simplified answer is there's a way in which you know in your body and you know from the cues around you that can help inform you. You have to build relationship to so that you can start to go, no, I need to take a pause here. It's really important that I do that. And there's 3 elements to the zone of fulfillment. And like I said, that's a longer conversation, but each one of those is what helps you tune into that feedback that's available to you so that you can gauge for yourself. Is this right for me to move forward? Or is this something that's actually healthier and still aligning for me to adjust back?
Yeah, let's not give everybody too much because they can tune into the TEDx talk to find out more. There you go, everybody. I'm intrigued though. Do athletes or anybody in life have to go through that adversity to be great?
Well, elaborate on that adversity.
So obviously in this incident, you went just one more and it didn't work. There's been multiple athletes who have done exactly the same as you. Push. Something's happened, whatever it is, yet they've overcome it. And that's what's made them great. Or can athletes get around that and not have to go to that point and still be great?
I believe so. I believe that you can totally do that. I believe that nature is a perfect example of that. I think humans, though, have a really difficult time of understanding, first of all, what's motivating their behavior. I think when you look at athletes, like I'm a huge Jordan fan. I grew up a huge Chicago Bulls fan, total front runner when they were winning their championships. And one of my favorite documentaries is The Last Dance. And if you watch that, you'll see a scene where, you know, 8 episodes worth of, you know, what Jordan did to help his team become this championship team. Okay. And at a certain point, I think it's like the 6th episode, there's a point where it's a really moving point because people are talking about how much of an asshole he was almost belligerent he was. And Jordan's like, this is it. This is how I know how to get my people in alignment and stuff. And so the person behind the camera asked this simple question. He's like, so how does that make you feel? Putting your heart, trying to get these guys to be their best, and people think you're this asshole, belligerent, bully kind of guy. And what I found so fascinating was you see this guy who has no reason to feel any kind of regret or shame, literally show emotion. I think if they left the camera on any longer, he probably would have had a tear in his eye. And he literally says, stop, we're done for the moment. And that's the tension that's there. Because often we look at it and we say, well, he won the 6 championships and there's no way he could have done that any other which way. But there's a story I shared with you. I love just sharing the story with everybody because I think that's the difference. It's Justine Dupont. She's this huge ultra surfer who just is, I mean, it's like a work of art in how she handles these monster waves, 50-foot waves. And she had an experience where she was trying to conquer Jaws. It's this legendary surf break in Hawaii. It has like literally 50-foot waves, monster things, really, really challenging. And she was at the top of her game, did it, and ended up wiping out and literally almost destroying her body physically. Emotionally, she was broken. It was like, my experience times like 1,000 as far as intensity and severity and so forth. And she was broken. You could see she was rattled. She didn't know how to be who she was without that. And over time, she eventually started to use that experience to not only not give in to the injury and so forth and the sense of her identity being broken, but she then decided to step forward in a way that was rekindling of why she got in the water in the first place, which was her love for the ocean. And as a result of that, her whole approach to training shifted. And it became something that you might even say was a little bit more spiritual. And I don't mean that to sound all fluffy and new agey. It was something where the connection was, the motivation was a lot different than just, I'm going to be the absolute best. And she went from basically being what I call a wounded warrior to a wise warrior, an enlightened warrior, where now that drive is something that is still going to lead her to success, but the nature of it and the ripple effects of that are very, very different. And I think and anyway, she ended up going back to Jaws, thriving, doing a phenomenal job. And she said it was like a spiritual experience for her because it was such a powerful thing, where in the past it would have just been, can I do it? I did it. Great. And I think that's the thing that gets lost in how we train people. I think that's what gets lost a lot of times in all kinds of sports, where it's like we look and glorify the championships, the banners, the accolades and so forth. And we don't ask the question, what are the ripple effects of how they're doing it? And there are very few examples, other than the first thing that just pops to mind are like the San Antonio Spurs versus the Lakers. You have Kobe Bryant, who's that, I think he had a quote he said once, which was something along the lines of, like, brothers come and go, but banners last forever. I remember hearing that. I was like, really? Like, that's what you believe? Now, I think he evolved, especially once he had children, and that was shifting. But if you look at it, it was really fascinating because after his sort of peak, nobody wanted to come play with him and nobody wanted to play in the Lakers. But the San Antonio Spurs, they were a little bit less exciting and so forth, but they had continuity and they had just as many championships during, I'm forgetting now who, Tim Duncan and Ginobili, and I'm forgetting the third, there was 3 people there, but they had just as much success. It was done differently, but the ripple effects of that were very, very different. And that's really what I challenge and invite every single athlete out there to consider, which is, what's the nature of your experience right here, right now, and how you're going through it? Are you being at your best because it's something that's driven by this, like, if I don't do this, I'm awful, I'm not good enough? Or is it something that is driven from this inspiration from within that is, I know I can be more, but it's from this expansive energy that's not so tight. And I think that that's something that, yes, people have to go and push beyond their limits. But just as you can lift weights, I like to use this analogy, you can lift, a dumbbell and use good alignment and form, and it takes a lot of effort. You have to overcome your limits to do that. You can also do what a lot of people do, which is, I'm just going to throw a ton of weight on, I'm going to use my whole back, and I'm going to do it and rip and tear muscles and so forth, right? Both are overcoming a form of limitation. One's going to cause unnecessary wear and tear in your body or around you. One's going to be something that actually leads to something very, very expansive. And that's the best and simplest way I can kind of describe it. But we tend to sum it up as this either or. I can have the championships, or I can have, a better family life, or a better this or a better that. And the answer is, it doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah. And I like what you said there about, Kobe changing with family. I've been watching the Starting Five, another basketball documentary, and they show them through the process of behind the scenes, and all of them are family men, and they also explain how their perception has changed and and things like that. And it does, we all grow through sport in many different ways. And we're all taught to follow a goal, right? You know, the thing I find fascinating is NHL 82 game grueling season, 2-month playoff, like they say it's the hardest trophy to win, the Stanley Cup. You get to keep it for a couple of months and then you got to give it back. Yes, you are etched in history. You are etched in history. Nobody can take that away from you, but you got to give that cup back and go again. And if you're, you know, constantly chasing that, you can see why people lose purpose when they stop playing a sport. If you're constantly chasing a goal, because once that goal is removed, because it will in sport, if you take it seriously, at some point that ultimate competitiveness will be taken away from you because we can't do it forever. What then? And that's where a lot of these players are kind of maturing with family and seeing that there is more to life and things like that. And it's just a constant evolution. Life is a constant evolution. And, you know, you have this zone of fulfillment. And like I said, if you're going to be talking about in the TEDx, I would highly recommend people going to tune into the full version. But, you know, maybe give people just a little snapshot of, you know, the example here with which we talk about with the athletes, the best practice, and just kind of share a little bit more on that.
Sure. So when I say fulfillment, first of all, it's important to understand what I mean by that, because one of the things I was really curious by is why are all these people who are so-called successful with money, with, you know, professional success, with athletic success and so forth, why is their day-to-day user experience so unpleasant, right? And the first thing is that most people define fulfillment as an accomplishment. I set a goal, I achieve it, I feel fulfilled. But like you said, you got to give that trophy back. So it's a fleeting kind of fulfillment. But we're going to ask you, what's one of the most amazing moments of your life? Right? Just take a moment. What is one of those, like, where you felt awe, wonder? What comes up for you, Sean?
Wonder moment?
Just a moment. Not the most, but just what's a moment where you're just like, man, I felt this just incredible sense of wonder, awe, whatever. Moment you remember the rest of your life.
The first thing that always pops into my mind is my youngest. The first 2 weeks of his life was blue lighted to hospital for, you know, he'd gone blue and floppy, and I've only ever cried once with happiness, and that's when they told us that he was healthy and he could go home. I never understood how people cried with happiness. I always assumed it was a sad moment, but I'd never experienced anything like that. And the fact that they said, yeah, he can go home now, just like straight away, that the feel, like even now I just get like little shivers, but I can't explain how that really was, because it was something I never ever thought I would experience, let alone actually experience. So that was the kind of the big wow moment for me.
I got a chill as you were sharing that. So thank you, both as a parent and just as just somebody who, especially in terms of tears and what they can translate to and so forth. But what's interesting is when I ask people, and I've asked people this question for 5 years, people from all different walks of life, and other questions around navigating these contradictory truths that are out there on how to be your best and perform your best and achieve and so forth. And the thing that was interesting was no matter what you want, if you really get to the root of it, is we want to fill with this vitality, for lack of a better way to put it. What you just described is, like you said, it's like, I can't even put words to it, but you felt probably this expansive energy. There's a tingle, there's something, and it's like, there's life to it, right? We don't have good words to describe it, but it was a kind of inspired energy that's like, whoa, this is different, right? And if you think about, why do you want the trophy? Why do you want to be the best? Why do you want to have the legacy? Why do you want to have more money and so forth? It's because ultimately, whether we're conscious of it or not, we think it's going to translate to more of that expansive feeling. The thing is that we've somehow, for whatever reason, bought into a story that says, okay, in order to get there, I have to do the exact opposite, which is squeeze the heck out of my day, my life, my energy, my emotions and so forth, just until I get to that point. And then I'll finally do this. And I always ask people, as an athlete, when are you at your best? When you're playing hockey, all right? Or when you're being a father or whatever. Are you at your best when you're like this? Like really tight? And are you going to be able to move on the ice and do all the things you do? Are you going to be creative and loving and compassionate when you're like this, or when you're like this? You're going to do it when you're like this. So fulfillment's at the root of what we want. We have to define it differently. And it's how do we get that energy out of us that comes out of nowhere and there's no limit to it, right? And so there's three things that really we have to take into account. And the three things are The first one I call there's sort of three spheres. Think of them like a Venn diagram overlapping. And when you engage all those in this moment becomes fulfilling. And that doesn't mean it's sitting on a beach, sipping, your favorite drink or whatever, relaxing. It could be grueling in a weight room, or trying to go that one more, but how you're going to do that is going to be very, very different. And so those three spheres are what I call your vitality, which is everything that's alive in you. That's all your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, and so forth that are contributing to who you are in this moment. And all that wants is for you to honor it in that moment. And it might be something where right now, for most athletes, until they start to have families and things along those lines or experiences that wake them up and say, hey, there's more to it than that. It's a wound. I need to do this deep down inside in order to feel good about myself, because I just don't. I'm not enough. And that can sound all self-helpy, but it's just the nature. It's true if you truly get at that. And the question is that enjoyable? Are you at your best when you're doing that? You might be pretty damn good, but the experience of that actually is totally like this the whole time. Okay. And we don't have to go to therapy for that. You can. I'm a big fan of therapy, but it's not about that. It's just about honoring in this moment. That's what's driving me. And once you recognize that, then you can take a next step, which is tuning into the second sphere, is tuning into, I call it your mirror. What's happening around you? And this is what often gets overlooked. You ever have one of those moments where you start to, you're with your kids, you probably do this. I've had moments with my daughter, Ava, where I'm just like, Ava, will you stop being so loud? And I'm literally being loud as I'm telling her to stop being loud, or stop being so intense, or stop this or that, right? And it's like, where you go and you go, okay, I remember my wife wanted to get a Mini, and all of a sudden, all we saw around us were Minis. It's like the world around us, whether you look at quantum physics or ancient cultures, or there's so much wisdom out there that's telling us that life is reflecting back what's going on in here. Now, why is that important? It's not if all you care about is getting your name on the trophy at all costs. But if you can understand that, then what life is trying to do, when I say life, I mean just the principles of evolution, what wants everybody to be at their absolute best, just like evolution wants an oak tree to be the best oak tree it can be. All of that's pointing us to the third sphere, which is what I called earlier, or I mentioned, your medicine. And this is a concept that for most Western cultures, or people from a Western culture, have a really hard time understanding. But my journey led me to explore all different bodies of wisdom. And it led me to explore Native American cultures and indigenous, ancient indigenous cultures. And all of them have this same teaching that's been passed down for thousands of years, which is we show up with this medicine, this innate way of seeing, feeling, engaging the world around us. And when you do that, when you align with that, you are medicine for the world. And I tell people, I go, why is walking in nature? I don't know if you like going into nature, but most people say when you go into nature, you immediately feel better. You can breathe better. You have that kind of expansive energy. I say, yeah, we can study all the mechanics of it, but at the root, these cultures taught that the trees, the ants, even the poison ivy, it's all just expressing its medicine. And when you really get that, you start to see and understand that there's a way that you are at your best. And if you build relationship to that, man, you're going to be so much more successful in not only what you're doing, but how you're doing it. The problem is we have been taught to be very, very different than who we really are. And more often than not, most athletes I talk to have been taught to be successful in ways that completely contradict that natural way of being. And so as a result, what ends up happening is you achieve. And it's this kind of like, I'm going to do it at all costs, but it's not fun. It's not fulfilling, right? And the thing is that learning about your medicine and building a relationship to it and then applying it in your professional life is something that takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes a daily kind of commitment. But when you do that, just as Justine Dupont showed, when you engage the same activity in alignment with your medicine, the whole experience of it is qualitatively different, and it ripples out in ways that are really, really powerful. And so all of that together allows you to engage this moment, the most taxing, toxic work meeting, the most challenging, like I'm starting to train for a marathon, and I did my first run yesterday, and it's like, I'm sitting there like, let me just get through this. And that is a way I could do it. But there's a way in which I could tune into those different elements and now make that experience itself something that's not fulfilling like an accomplishment, fulfilling in terms of that energy that comes out. That's a very, very different way of going about it. So that's it in a really, really quick nutshell. But it's something that's a total paradigm shift in not only what we do, but how we do it.
Yeah, I see it. Dopamine again, more wins. One of its drivers is more wins, so again, it's more goals, more trophies. And that's where we get taken to within sport. And this is a big driver behind the podcast, is to show you there's so much more to sport than just how many trophies that are in your loft that nobody cares about. I've spoken about it, big games that I've maybe not been at my best, or I've let my team down. Nobody remembers. I do. If I talk to my teammate or a fan, they'd be like, no, I don't remember that. Life moves on. Sport in the moment is all important. I played ice hockey since I was 5 till 32. I was an ice hockey player. I had the luxury. I don't even know if it's a luxury. I made a choice, but I finished my career as a semi-pro. So I was working at the same time. So I had a very easy transition. The work that I was doing at the time was more of my bread and butter than my sport was. So I had a nice, easy transition, easy. I had stuff that I had to kind of work through mentally, but I kind of moved away from hockey into business, and off I went. But a lot of people don't have that. Even even business owners, I am the business owner. I am a CEO. There's so much more to that. And when people realize, when you're talking zone of fulfillment or purpose or passion, whatever kind of route we want to go down, when you have that all aligned, you perform better anyway. And like you said, in a relaxed state, in a mindful state, sport life isn't meant to be constantly thinking whilst we're going. It's supposed to be a bit more habitual. We train, we prepare to perform in a presentation, in a game. And all of that work aligns to us just being natural and being more ready for those difficult scenarios. So, I know a lot of people, you said it a few times, people might be, eye rolling or thinking stuff. It's not. It's just becoming more obvious to us in the world that we live in that we need to kind of listen to all of this information that's been there for years, decades, hundreds of thousands, centuries. It's the same principles, the same basic things to a happy life. We've just got to evolve it into how we live today.
And I think you said it, I love how you said it there at the end. It's been around. And you asked, does somebody have to go through adversity? We all, if you think about it, those first two spheres that I was telling you about are what's alive in us. We need to shed so much of how we understand who we are to be, because we're capable of so much more. And it's our medicine is what, in the way I work with people around it, it's helping them understand that, wow, that's that spring, that well from which you can become so much more. And it's hard to fathom that. And so what ends up happening is anytime you find yourself feeling like you're not enough, you're not worthy, or I'm only going to be like my career is only going to mean something if I have that championship at the end, right? I think of like the Dan Marinos and the Patrick Ewings, right? Where it's like Hall of Fame career, never won a championship. And you might say, well, that's the one stain on their thing. But it's like, if you understand that sport, the real reason why you got into sport, whether it's conscious or not, was to become a better you. And then, of course, we want to win. That's great. That's what drives us. That's what motivates us and so forth. But when it comes to a point where that defines us, that's where we start to run into trouble. And, the thing that you're describing that I think is so important for your listeners to understand, if you're feeling like, hey, man, this is just crazy, whatever, great. That's fine. You don't need, when the time is right, you'll have that wake up call, because everybody goes through it. The only reason why I'm aware of this is because A, life brought me to my knees, and B, I started interviewing people from their 20s to their 80s and started to hear the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm like, I should probably listen to this now and not have the same regrets. But each one of us has to go through that process, however it's going to be. The real kicker, the thing that I'm passionate about and why I work with organizations and so forth, is because I'm like, man, we could unleash a whole different level of skill and impact when we embrace that alignment as the way forward, in terms of productivity in the office, actual, points that you put on the board or whatever your metric is in sport, and the ripple effects can be categorically different. And that's the thing that I'm most excited about. And in a way, that's what I loved about sport anyway. It's about bringing us back to that place where, man, you remember when you were I'm sure you probably remember the first time you got on the ice, right? With a stick in your hand. And it's like, it's not about, I'm going to become the next, it's just, there's something about that spoke to you, right? And it's like that energy, man, is available to us each and every day. And we've just normalized something that says, no, it actually isn't that way. And the choice is, do you allow yourself to be defined by that or not? You know, and I've made a choice, and I'm grateful for it. And at the end of the day, we have to live by our choices. So whatever you choose, just know that you're choosing and make the choice that you are okay living with. That's really how I would leave it with your listeners.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I grew up. Ray Bork, I believe he got traded to Colorado on the deadline, and he ended up winning the trophy and retiring. That's how I perceived. That's how I was going to retire, with the trophy. Thank you, everybody. I'm now retired. I'm retired a champion. And in hindsight, my last game was, from memory, probably one of the worst I played.
Yeah,
it was a bad season. It was probably one of the driving reasons behind retiring. And it didn't work out as planned. Yeah, we're sitting here today because of that. You know, at the time, probably didn't feel right, because that's how I'd always dreamt, that I was going to go out a champion. In hindsight, sport doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. But what it does is it's a lesson that allows you to grow and be able to, you know, to experience things like this fulfillment. And you know, I believe life has a purpose for all of us, as long as we're willing to listen and grow. And this is mine. Yeah, I wasn't meant to play in the NHL. Played against a few NHL players, but I wasn't meant to play in the NHL, and I'm okay with that now.
Think of how much, but think of the ripple effects too. So let's say you won a Stanley Cup trophy. Like, that would have been amazing, right? Like, let's not minimize that. That would have been absolutely amazing. But think about the experiences that you are having now when you talk to people, whether you're working with them as clients, whether you're doing talks, whether you're this podcast and so forth. And think of the actual impact that you're truly having, and the legacy that that's going to have in terms of the ripple effects that they then go and have on the world and so forth, right? When you get to that point, one of the things I always do when I'm talking to people, I can't help it, because it's just something I found really powerful, is I ask people to half close your eyes. Just half close your eyes. And as you do, just imagine, even if it sounds morbid, just imagine that's going to be in this moment right here, right now, this is going to be the last thing you're going to see, the last moment you're going to have. How are you going to feel about that? Right? Not what are you going to regret, and all, just how are you going to feel? And at that point, there's something really telling about that, where people are just like, wow, you know, it's like, because they realize that they're in this state that's like, I don't want to be in that. I really don't. I want a very different way of being the best version of me. And so, yeah, man, it's just, it's, I feel for where I was and where people are on their journey. And there's a passion to want to help. And there's also, in my years, later years, I've come to understand that everybody will do so when the time is right. And I just hope that you can enjoy the user experience of pursuing whatever achievement, whatever sporting stat that you're going for. By all means, do it. By all means, make it happen. Inspire others through that. But just make sure your experience of that is what you want it to be, because that's what's going to ripple out long after your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. What's next, David? What's next for you?
I'm gonna go out and take my dog for a walk. That's what's literally what's next.
In the moment. I like that. I always get future answers, but boom, typical you right there, straight in the moment.
Taking my dog for a while. That's literally, like I said, I'm dense, right? Now, what's next for me? I've got a book coming out later this fall. That's this years and years of doing this research, interviewing people and these bodies of wisdom, and about this zone of fulfillment, and really just moving from talking about it in these smaller, more intimate settings, and really trying to get into the organizational, corporate kind of environment, because I believe that when business starts to understand this, man, the way the world will be very, very different.
Where can people find that book when it comes out? Where can they find your TEDx talk that you're going on?
So the TEDx talk, they'll put on the main TEDx. There's a whole, if you just search TEDx talks or whatever, but it's next month is when I'm actually recording it. And then it'll probably take a couple months for them to, I think there's a process for them to approve it. And, they just scrutinize everything to make sure it's all It's all grounded in fact and so forth. So I can share with you once it's actually out if people are interested. My website is magicandawe.com. And I will post, links there and so forth of the TED Talk.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story today. The energy was there. You did us proud. You kept up to my high standards that I set you right at the beginning. So I really do appreciate you sharing that today with us.
Well, thank you. I love what you're doing. I love how you're taking your experience and giving it back tenfold. Yeah, it's just the heart that you put into everything, man, and the authenticity. Like I said, when I first came across your podcast, I was just like, yes, this is cool. So I appreciate you allowing me to help share with your people, and I hope they got something out of it.
And that's all we're here to do. We're here to just help one person today. And if that was you, brilliant. Our work here is done. If you know somebody that needed to hear this, somebody that may resonate with the story, please send it to them. Anything you can that just shares the episode that helps it grow and helps more people. Because if we can help more than one person every episode, then we are definitely winning here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And remember, there is always another game. Take care.